Call to order the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, June 16th, 2022. Please stand and join us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Kroll, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Knobloch,
Here.
Commissioner Heikkila, Commissioner Bradley, Commissioner Casey,
Here.
Commissioner Schmolke,
Here.
Commissioner Geisler,
Here.
and Chair Schwartz.
Here. Thank you. All right, first order of business this evening is to adopt our agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Geisler, second by Knobloch. Any additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? And the agenda is adopted. Next, we have the approval of the minutes of our May 19th meeting.
Chair Schwartz,
Commissioner Knobloch.
I move that we approve the minutes from the May 19th, 2022 meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Casey.
with the correction of the spelling of our new city planner's name, Dakota Kroll, it's misspelled in the minutes.
Otherwise, that's a second.
That's correct.
Thank you. Any other corrections? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the minutes are
Abstain.
approved with one abstention, Commissioner Schmolke. Our first case for the evening is Planning Case 22-10, a site plan for Take 5 oil change at 1829 Northdale Boulevard Northwest, Garage Holdings LLC. Mr. Call.
Right. Good evening, commissioners. I'm going to just give a staff analysis and update on our staff report for Planning Case 2210, the site plan for Take 5 oil change. So here's just a location map to get our bearings. It's at the corner of Northdale and Hanson Boulevard, just north of Highway 10. So on the north and east there is Lyons Coon Creek Park. To the immediate south of the parcel is the car wash, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, that's associated with this site. And then to the west is just a variety of different commercial uses there along Hanson Boulevard. So the Planning Commission, you might recall, you initially discussed this site back on meeting February 18th of 2021, where you approved a site plan for a 4,000 square foot car wash and a 3,900 square foot multi-tenant commercial building. And now the applicant has since submitted their site plan to construct a 1,864 square foot express oil change station in place of the multi-tenant commercial building. So that was the old site plan, and so here's the new site plan with the service station. Here it meets all of our dimensional requirements in terms of our minimum setbacks, our site area, building coverage, and building floor plan area. This new proposed site plan is still compatible with the adjacent commercial land uses and includes sufficient buffering from our conservancy uses to the park there to the north and east. Again, this new site plan does align with our future land use designation for the site and is a permitted use in the general commercial district where this is located. And then, because of the similar intensity of adjacent commercial uses, the project in staff's recommendations and kind of staff's analysis won't create any additional disturbances that are detrimental to the surrounding areas. There, in terms of circulation, here that it's going to utilize two existing driveways, one from Northdale Boulevard and one from Hanson Boulevard. Both of those driveways are right in, right turn out only, and then are shared with the car wash. So cars entering the site from Northdale would pass through the kind of the east side of the parking lot in the site to access the station. And then cars entering the site from Hanson would pass through the north of the site there and into the entrance of the station. In terms of parking, they have 28 parking stalls that includes 10 vacuum cleaner spaces, and those are going to be used by both the car wash and the oil change station. Our zoning code requires 4 spaces plus 2 per stall for vehicle repair, so requiring a minimum of 10 spaces, and so here we have 18, so they meet our minimum requirement. I think here's just some images. I know the one is kind of hard to see probably on the screen. Just kind of showing the stacking there, the space available at the oil change station. So you can see they have room for approximately 9 cars in stacking. Our zoning code doesn't have like a specific number required. This isn't like a drive-through kind of service window. And so we felt like the dimensions of that waiting area do meet our minimum standard. Staff felt comfortable with the shown kind of stacking. There is also, because they have more than the minimum parking, in case there's ever overflow, there are some parking spaces there for potential overflow. And talking with the city engineer, because of the site, it was already adding that right turn lane in from Hanson Boulevard, felt pretty comfortable that this change in use wasn't going to create any dramatic changes to the traffic analysis that was done with the previous site plan approval. This is just a floor plan of the building, again showing the 3 service bays, and then a small kind of like office storage area and restroom there for employees of the station, kind of pretty straightforward. Here are the elevations. They comply with our allowable massing and materials. So exterior materials are a mix of stucco, brick, and board paneling. The lower portion of the building and the tower are finished with brick, and then the upper portion there is a stucco. Colors are a mix of tan and light brown. And what it doesn't show here in this one rendering that we had from the title sheet is the roof is a red color, not this kind of black or gray that you see in the rendering. Again, east and west elevations have the garage doors where vehicles would exit and enter. There's one window to the east and then the door for the employees on the west elevation. And we felt with the tower design and the awnings that they'd have over the window creates some visual interest that is kind of outlined in our code as well. And then I think finally here, this is their landscaping plan. Again, it meets our minimum standards in terms of the number and variety of different trees and shrubs that we outline. The one piece I guess I'll mention here when I get into the recommendations, you might have noticed in my report we had a condition of approval of providing a sidewalk connection from the door of the building to the public sidewalk along Hanson. It's not shown here in the landscape plan, but in the original site plan, it was our understanding that the sidewalk connection here to the north was already being built from the previous approval with the car wash and multi-tenant retail building. And so seeing that coming through, and then there is a proposed sidewalk from the ADA space and the entrance, and just trying to figure out a way to build that connection between both of those. And so if that happens, there might be some slight impact to the landscaping to the, what would be the south of the building there if they have to run the sidewalk kind of around the building to that future connection. And so that would just be something staff felt like that we wanted to recommend and kind of work with the architect. I was in contact with the architect to get a new proposal site plan showing that sidewalk connection, but I didn't get it in time for the meeting today, so I kept it in as a condition of approval. And so I think with that, again, staff recommendation is to approve the proposed site plan with some of our conditions. So again, addressing the engineering comments, applicant would enter into a site security agreement with the city, showing an internal sidewalk connection, connecting the building entrance to the public sidewalk along Hanson Boulevard, and then all signage that is in the plan. I think they have one monument sign and a couple of wall signs. Those are all subject to separate sign permits and aren't approved as part of this site plan review. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to any comments or questions you might have for me.
Thank you. Commission, any questions for Mr. Kroll?
Chair Schwartz?
Commissioner Knobloch?
Planner Kroll? Oh,
Yeah, Kroll,
okay,
yep.
welcome.
Thanks.
In this plan, I have 2 points. One, it's a much better plan than previously. I think previously we had it as a multi-tenant retail. I think this is much more functional and better. And the second point I wanted to bring up is on the southeast corner, there's the garbage enclosure. Now, is that going to be matching with the oil change location, and will there be a cover on the top?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think from what I remember in the plans, there was going to be an enclosure, at least kind of like gates that I think would open or
Okay.
close to kind of shield the trash enclosure there at the entrance, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just, I kind of live northwest of there, and I'm always going by there, and I always, at all times of all hours, and I see deer, a raccoon, I see tons of animals, activities, so, birds, so, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Geisler?
Mr. Kroll, a couple questions and clarifications here. First of all, the oil change and the car wash are two separate properties, correct? They're two separate parcels?
Yeah, I believe so, because I think part of the site plan review was also a preliminary plat that was approved. So I think they are now two separate parcels is my understanding. I know that was a little bit before my time, and Matt probably has a clearer answer, but yeah.
Based on my understanding, they are.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, do we also need to make sure we get a shared access agreement here, given that all the parking is technically not on this parcel? And to make sure that these properties are permanently linked together, given that the access from Northdale is actually through the car wash property? Is that another condition we should probably consider here?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Geisler, I think we can certainly add that.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
They seem highly reliant upon each other,
Yes.
so, or at least the car wash is, or the oil change is reliant upon the car wash anyway, given the parking and the trash. If the trash is serving both businesses, that's reliant for the car wash.
So
if they're sharing.
proposed item 5 then?
That would be
what
a shared access agreement between the two sites be entered into.
Good one.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, and sorry, if I may,
Go ahead.
one last one. As far as when it comes to the engineering of waste handling for the site, because Coon Creek is really close to here, is that something that engineering covers during the building design phase? Or is that something that's covered under the watershed district? Where does that fall in?
Commissioner Geisler, I guess I'm not clear on the question with regard to the waste haul. Are you talking about the actual
Sorry,
closure or the services, or I'm not?
I should be more specific. Hazardous waste, given oil and fluids and other things from, this was a previously commercial building that wouldn't really have that.
Right.
So,
right.
but with given the proximity to the watershed and the creek there.
Correct. So the applicant will have to go through the watershed district for their approvals. I believe separate from that, they'll have to probably work with the MPCA to get a hazardous waste generators license, which is a separate process that they would have to pursue at some point down the road.
So that's handled either by the watershed or the MPCA, not by the city aspect?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Casey?
Yes, so a couple questions. Is that garbage, trash enclosure shared by the two businesses on the site?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought there was a separate one for the car wash. I don't know. Okay, they are separate. Okay, yeah, if we
Okay.
have some of the owners here in the audience, yeah. So that is separate.
They're separate, and then there was, where did I read something about a little mezzanine area? I don't know the flow of this business. Do people get out of their cars? Oh, so there's no real public space that you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that the mezzanine goes below, correct? And they would work on the car underneath? Or, yeah,
If
okay.
you'd like, I'd be happy to address the.
Yeah, if you come up to the microphone,
Yeah.
please, give your
Okay.
name and address for the record.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Mr. Commissioner, Commissioners, my name is Tim Eaton. My address is 15706 Highland Heights Drive in Minnetonka, Minnesota, 55345. I'm one of the owners of Take 5 Oil Change. We are a franchisee, so I should say we're a franchisee ownership group. And we've entered into an agreement to build multiple Take 5s across the Twin Cities metro area. A little bit about Take 5 Oil Change. So it was founded in 1984 in the New Orleans area. It was a family-owned business until it got to about 30 locations. It was then bought by a private equity group, and it is in the process of being expanded across the country. The differentiator for Take 5 is we aim to be sort of the premium service when it comes to oil changes. And the way that that happens is we are the friendliest, we are the fastest, and we're the simplest. And those are the three things that we really stand on. So it's a 10-minute oil change. It's a stay-in-your-car oil change. So customers don't get out of their vehicles at all. And we make sure that they don't. We have signs posted, and employees are trained to keep them in their vehicles in order to maximize safety. And then we only offer 5 services. So we do oil changes, we do engine air filters, cabin air filters, windshield wiper blades, and coolant exchanges. So it's a very simple business model. We don't have a lot of big equipment in our excuse me, in our locations. And along with that, some of the reason why we do that, the building design the way that we do, is to minimize any kind of potential hazardous waste type situation. So there are no basements. We do a shallow pit design, which is about 3 feet deep, where the employees slide under the car, perform the oil change, and then slide back out. We don't have any pressurized lines in the facility itself. We don't want any kind of line bursting or anything like that. Everything's gravity fed. And then where we store our new oil and where we store our used oil, it's actually connected by a chase to the different, we call them pits or loop trenches. And then everything is sloped towards those trenches. The reason why is if for some reason any kind of tank started leaking, the loop trenches would actually fill up like bathtubs. They're completely sealed, they're epoxy coated, so they're, no liquid's gonna get through them, and we can come and we can take care of that. So there are no fluids that are draining out of the shop. Even any runoff from cars, those are gonna drain into the loop trenches, and we just clean them out. So we don't utilize drains in our shop because we don't want that issue. So the only drain in the shop, there's one in the restroom because there has to be, and then there's one for the mop sink, which is connected to an oil waste separator, and that's the only place that any kind of fluids can go. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information. A couple other questions that were asked that I could clarify for you. There are 2 parcels. Our parcel does include a parking field. We have 10 parking spaces on our part of the parcel. It kind of is it kind of zigs down a little bit and catches those parking spots. We've already entered into a shared use agreement with the owners and operators of the car wash. We're happy to provide that as part of our documentation. We realize that we are very much co-tenants on the site. We do have access to the Hanson street side. That's our access point. The Northdale Boulevard one is for the car wash, and then we share that. So hopefully that helps with a few other pieces. And the trash enclosure, we have separate trash enclosures. I think that was addressed as well. So
Thank you.
okay, you're welcome.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Smoky.
So really, if I could just a follow-up question, I guess, for you then. So how many employees do you have on site then?
So we're going to be somewhere between 8 and 16, depending on the car volume that we have.
Okay.
That wouldn't be all at once.
Okay.
The maximum number of employees that we would ever have at any given time would be 10. We wouldn't have any more than that.
Is the expectation then that the parking spaces you've been designated would be for employee parking there?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And this would be actually a question back to you, Mr. Crowell, then. Do we have an area, because it would actually be, they'd have to walk across traffic, so to speak, right, to get right to the building? Are we going to stripe that or anything like that to make sure that it's safe for employees to be crossing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We would certainly encourage that, and I know that was part of the discussion with making that connection on the sidewalk, especially for, employees or customers walking through the lot, or providing that connection up to Hanson in case, an employee on their lunch break or something wanted to go across the street. There's like the Holiday, a couple different restaurants like Caribou, and things there. So I think definitely that could be a part of that condition to have it striped crossing through there.
Okay, and the minimum requirement is 10. We feel that with their staffing, the 10 will be sufficient then?
Yeah, our code, the minimum would be 10 spaces
Okay.
for that, and then, in terms of the shared parking space, I guess there'd be 18 stalls and then those 10 vacuum stalls.
Okay.
And we don't have any parking minimum or parking requirements for a car wash, and so,
Okay.
I feel those 10 would be sufficient, plus those additional 8 that we would have there.
Thank you.
Mr. Kroll, could you please show on the site map where the sidewalk is anticipated to go?
Yeah. So I think when I was the architect had sent kind of a draft plan, but it wasn't anything kind of formalized. I would imagine it would probably have to run along the building here, and then kind of curve around to make that connection to the sidewalk that would be coming down from the public sidewalk on Hanson. So I imagine there'd be potential crossing right where vehicles would be exiting the garage, and then there's the kind of connection down to the ADA spot, and if we wanted to build a crossing or stripe a crossing into the actual parking lot, it might be kind of imagining like on the landscape plan here, that the sidewalk would run kind of along the building and come across. And I think that was part of where I was trying to clarify with the architect, because their landscape plan doesn't show the sidewalk. And so there would be probably some impacts to their current landscape plan and where they were kind of proposing the sign and having to adjust that.
So we would also have striping across the exit driveway area there?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, there would be a crossing there to that sidewalk connection across this driveway here. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Kroll?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Geisler?
Mr. Kroll, with, given that sidewalk, again, it's hard to tell what the spacing is exactly. Are you comfortable that if all of that landscaping along that building was lost due to the requirement of the sidewalk, that the site will still meet our landscaping requirements?
I think they would not. So there would be, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I think they were right at the minimum. So any kind of loss that we'd see along the building, they would have to show somewhere else on site. So that is something to, kind of take into consideration with the condition.
Okay.
Commission, any other questions for Mr. Kroll? All right, is there anything else the petitioners would like to add? Okay, we do need a public hearing, and at this time I will open a public hearing in planning case 22-10, the site plan for Take 5 oil change at 1829 Northdale Boulevard Northwest, Garage Holdings LLC. Anyone wish to speak at this public hearing? Anyone wish to speak? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and limit comments to the commission. All right, I do have a couple additional questions for the petitioners. If you could come up to the microphone, please. So you said that the design of this facility is for the customers to stay in their vehicles.
That is correct.
And then you also indicated that one of your services is cabin air filters.
That's correct.
So you're gonna change the cabin air filter with the people still in the vehicle?
Yes, if there's a person in the passenger seat and the cabin air filter happens to be behind the glove box, which is where many of them are, then we won't perform that service. If there's a second person in the vehicle, we'll just tell the customer we're not able to do that.
All right. And do you have any material samples of the materials you plan on using and with color samples?
I do not have those with me this evening.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And Commission, any other comments, thoughts?
Mr. Chair, just a minor conversation. The shared access agreement would, maybe adjusting that to a shared access agreement, be provided to the city. Instead of, since it's already been entered into, we could just document that as we had previously discussed.
Okay, so your fifth condition would be documented shared access?
Sure. Documented shared access agreement be provided to the city, or the shared access agreement, either, or a copy of. Is there a preference?
Any parking agreements be furnished to the city.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Chair Schwartz.
Commissioner Knobloch.
Just for discussion purposes, I have an inkling of concern to have a sidewalk going to connect, which makes a lot of sense, but is there a potential option? Because if the sidewalk goes around the southern end of the building of the design, and it's gonna impact the requirements for the landscaping plan, because I think on the north part of the property, there is the access for the critical infrastructure underneath, so I don't think anything can go on top of there. My question is it possible as an option that an exit door could be put on the west side facing Hanson so that it could minimize the amount of putting a sidewalk around the building? Because it seems the main entrance is on the east side where the cars also enter. So it's more of a discussion, not a request, so.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kroll, do you want to address that?
Could you answer that, or as
Sure.
a possibility, or an option maybe?
Yeah, could you repeat that option? Sorry.
As there's discussion that a sidewalk go around from the east side around the southern basin of the proposed building and going up to the southwest corner, and then to connect with a sidewalk to connect with the Hanson Boulevard sidewalk. Is it a potential option? It's either for you or for the applicant to put a door on the west side of the proposed building, if that is a possibility, to reduce the impact of putting a sidewalk, which will cause an issue with our landscaping requirements for the option, so. And it might be simpler solution than actually putting in the sidewalk.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I guess that'd probably be a question for the applicant, because it would probably replace the only window that they show on the plan there. And I'm trying to look, it looks like it might be the office there where you would probably put the door, so I think that'd probably be a question, yeah, for the applicant if they wanted to change their
There would
floor
be
plan
design
like
right
that,
now.
yeah.
Or a very large egress window.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Geisler.
I guess I would just simply state that moves it away from the ADA slot, which defeats the purpose of having an ADA slot right by the door. I think that would further complicate the site plan significantly by moving the entrance. I guess when I look at the landscaping plan, if you could pull that up, Mr. Kroll, I look at the north side of that driveway, and there's plenty of spots to put shrubs all along that driveway if that was the landscaping requirement we felt needed to get hit. So I think there's adequate space here for them to achieve the landscaping plan to the city's satisfaction and still get a sidewalk that's functional and without disrupting their entire flow plan of the site. My opinion on that one.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Casey.
my understanding is there's the window on the east side, which may or may not be your office, but that's the feature on the east side, and there is a door on the west side. And that would be for employee access? And so what other door would you add on the west side is what I'm thinking. I don't think it's necessary either. It seems like the two east-west sides are covered and a connection to the sidewalk at the same time. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Well, I don't see a door on the west side of the,
There is one.
Bottom left here.
Yeah.
That's the existing door.
Right.
They're asking to put one on the opposite side of that. The suggestion is to put, if you look at the top of your rendering here.
On the east side,
To the right of the window or where the window is, replace that with a door. On the opposite side of the building, that's your picture in the bottom left-hand corner. That's
right.
where a door currently exists.
and that's actually the east.
That's the west in the bottom lower,
The
in the lower
east
one.
is here.
Yeah.
Well, but looking at the building, your tower is in the northwest corner. So the tower would be sitting,
I didn't pay
I believe the elevations are mislabeled.
I do too.
I think you're right.
Okay, yeah.
The east and west are
The
flipped on the
East and west
elevations.
are mixed up here. So that's the east elevation that shows the door.
Yeah, the door is by the handicapped access
Yep.
position, so.
But they're still opposite, right? So then they're looking to put it on the west side. We're asking to have it put on the west side?
That's what Commissioner
Right,
Knobloch is
right.
considering.
Correct.
Or proposing.
Yeah, that explains a lot. When you look at it that way.
So then ask for the petitioner, please, back to the microphone.
And Mr. Chair, while he's coming to the microphone, we're not asking to replace the door, you're asking to add a door is your request or your suggestion, correct?
It was a discussion, suggestion, if it's something that's feasible or something that may be a solution to the landscaping. It's a suggestion to minimize a potential landscaping issue for us in reviewing it, so.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just add, maybe the other option is, are they able to flip then, correct? So in whatever was planned for the east side, that would be on the west side, since it is all on that same south side of the building, or north side of the building, whatever it is. They can just maybe flip it. I don't know if that's an option. That way the door could be on the west side instead of the east side. That's a question, I guess, too. I don't know if that's an option.
Sure. I can address the
Sure.
commission. So I apologize. I'm looking at the plans as well, and they were mislabeled, so I apologize for the confusion. So we are required to have a door out of our garage bay area for egress reasons.
Okay.
So that's why we put the door on. Part of the Take 5 experience is when a customer comes on our lot within 30 seconds, an employee is expected to go out and greet the person with a complimentary bottle of water and just greet them and say, hey, we're glad you're here. And so having the door on that side allows us to be able to go out and greet the customers easily. The other reason for the door on that side is it's closest to the trash enclosure. So as employees have to remove waste, they're not taking it to the front door and then taking it out. They're taking out the back door, and it's a little easier that way. So if we were to add a door onto the west side as well, that would significantly reduce the amount of storage we have in a small building. So we would prefer not to do that. I'd be happy to build a sidewalk if if that's what you're looking for. And of course, we want to comply with all of the landscaping requirements. So we can go back to our design team and ask them if that's a condition of yours is, we want a sidewalk and we want landscaping requirements. We'll go back and have that done.
Thank you for the clarification.
And then a question I have, the interior diagram, which Mr. Kroll, if you could pull up the interior floor planning once more. It shows a restroom. Is that just an employee restroom?
That is correct. If a customer needs to use the restroom, of course, we're going to allow them to, but it is intended to be an employee restroom.
And so then, where the window is on the east, on what is the actual west side of the building, that is your office, correct?
That is correct.
And the south half of that wall, that's your storage area.
That's correct as well, yes.
Personally, I don't feel that we need to add another door to the building, taking away storage space that the building would need. And I think we can function just fine with just the one door on the east side.
I concur with that. I think we're adding in excess maybe. And still the sidewalk can be accommodated along the front of the building. And like Commissioner Geisler said, there's plenty of space to add in shrubbery if need be to the property. I'm good without a door, an additional door.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. I think you can sit down.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, thoughts from the commission? Anyone ready for a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion,
Commissioner Casey?
or
Or
Schmalky.
Schmalky.
That's okay. Before I make the motion, I do need to ask one clarifying question. With regard to the striping and so forth, we don't need to add those as conditions, correct? It was just the condition number 5?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So in planning case 22-10, the planning commission approves I'll make a motion that the planning commission approve the proposed site plan with the following conditions. All engineering comments be addressed. The applicant enter into a site security agreement with the city. An internal sidewalk connecting the building entrance to public sidewalks on Hanson Boulevard is provided. All signage is subject to separate sign permits. And the addition of number 5, which we agreed, the short version.
Shared access agreement?
Correct, the shared access agreement, is made available to the staff.
Second.
Motion by Schmalky, second by Geisler. Any further discussion? Hearing none? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. This is a decision by the Planning Commission and can be appealed to the City Council within 10 business days if someone so chooses. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right, our next case is planning case 21-2, a conditional use permit revocation at 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard, Fridley Auto Repair. Mr. Cornelius.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Schwartz and Commissioners. So this is the first of 2 items on our agenda tonight related to revocations of conditional use permits, both at the same address, 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard. This is a aerial drawing showing the location of the property along Coon Rapids Boulevard and 111th Avenue. It's near our Boulevard Park and Coon Rapids Ice Center, just for orientation purposes. The conditional use permit in question relates to the space that I've highlighted here on the floor plan, which is for suite 115. Just a little bit of background, as the Planning Commission is probably familiar. Back in January of 2021, the Commission approved a conditional use permit for this location. It was issued for a auto repair business. Fridley Automotive was the tenant at the time to operate, again, in that Suite 115. There were 4 conditions of approval with that conditional use permit. One was removal of barbed wire on the entire fence, which they are compliant with, by the way, or they satisfied that condition. Removal of a chain link fence on the west side, that was also accomplished. And then striping of 3 additional parking spots, that's not compliant. That was never completed as part of this particular application. And then compliance with Title 11, which is our zoning code, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It's not compliant. The use that is in there right now is not compliant with the conditional use permit or the zoning code. So Fridley Auto Repair vacated that space. They were the applicant in February of this year. They did not obtain building permits for the auto repair use. There were a number of things that needed to be done related to HVAC, other types of work that was necessary to accommodate an auto-oriented use. None of those permits were pulled, and as a result, we could not issue a certificate of occupancy. That set off a number of conversations that we had with the tenant, which became Lund Auto. They moved into the space then in March of this year. So there were conversations between staff, the current tenant, the landowner as well. And it was at that time that we learned that Lund Auto was conducting a form of auto salvage, removing parts from vehicles, which is not permitted under our zoning code. So it's essentially an illegal use, so it would not be permitted. We wouldn't qualify under the conditional use permit that had been granted to the previous tenant. We also discovered some things that were going on in the site that were concerning, one of which involved illicit discharge. So obviously when they're taking cars apart, there are fluids and other hazardous substances which were ultimately leaking out onto the parking lot and into our storm drain system. I know our streets supervisor went out on at least one call and took a number of photos, which we've included in the packet. And you can see some of the substances that were discovered going into the storm drain. A very unfortunate situation, which ultimately resulted in a letter from our Public Works Director notifying the tenant and the property owner that there had been an illicit discharge. That's the first step in the process of potentially much more significant issues if they're not cleaned up. I will say that this issue has since been addressed, but obviously it was something that was very concerning at that point in time. A couple of weeks ago, we did go out to the site. I've included some photographs. You'll note that a lot of the site has been cleaned up. The vehicles that were there that were being disassembled as part of the Lund Auto operation were moved off-site. In fact, the tenant at that point basically notified us that they were not going to remain in the space. Representative from the property owner was also there and alerted us that they were going to move the tenant out of the building at the end of the month. So I don't know where they're going, but they're not going to be in that particular space. So our recommendation this evening, as we've illustrated in the staff report, is to revoke the conditional use permit for this space. Basically, it's not in compliance with the zoning code or the original conditions of approval. Our city code does allow for revocation of a conditional use permit if any one of these 3 stipulations or conditions are triggered. One is that the applicant has not commenced work upon the property within 1 year. They didn't do that. They didn't obtain permits which were required for their occupancy. The existing conditional use ceases operation for 1 year. They were never really legally established, so this is a bit of a technical point, but we don't believe under interpreting our code that they were legally established and therefore that they've been there for purposes of the zoning code. And then a conditional use permit being operated or maintained contrary to the code, the approved CUP, or the conditions of approval. And that really, I think, is the primary issue here that is triggering the basis of our recommendation. We've outlined in the staff report, a number of things that the original conditions of approval, and those have, for the most part, been violated as a result of their current tenancy. I believe the property owner is here this evening if there are questions, but our recommendation would be to revoke the conditional use permit for planning case 21-2 for an auto establishment. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cornelius. Commission, any questions for Mr. Cornelius?
Chair Schwartz.
Commissioner Knobloch.
This situation, it doesn't make me very happy at all as a citizen of Coon Rapids. And I'd like to have an explanation from Mr. Friselius. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. And it's not on you or anything, but I have the question is there a fine date when the applicant, it says the end of June, how come they are not, since they've kind of in bad faith have not followed our regulations and civil operating procedures, that it's not revoked and they're immediately expelled? Or if there's any legal fines or civil fines involved immediately in this situation, because I see a consistent bad faith on their part, and perhaps the applicant could explain the situation so I could understand it a little better. So if you could give some more foundation or background to this situation, I'd like to have, I'm all for revoking this. I'd just like to have a firm date when this is going to be resolved and that it doesn't go anywhere beyond the end of this month, if not immediately.
So there's probably, Commissioner Knobloch, there's probably several ways to answer that. One, I mean, everyone is entitled to due process.
True.
So there is a process, as offended as we may be with what went on there, they still are entitled to due process. So we're going through that process. Part of that tonight is revocation of the conditional use permit, which deals with the zoning related aspect of it. If the commission agrees and the conditional use permit is revoked, that's kind of the first step. If the tenant for whatever reason still has not moved out of there, then there are other remedies that the city can explore. There's our administrative citation process. There's perhaps other legal remedies we could pursue. But those we don't need to exercise at this particular point in time. This is kind of the first step in the process. So I think that's what we can do from the city perspective. Obviously, I can't speak for the property owner with regard to what was going on with this particular tenant. That would be a question for him.
Thank you for your reasonable explanation.
Any other questions from the commission? All right, thank you, Mr. Cornelius. At this time, I will open a public hearing in planning case 21-2, the conditional use permit revocation at 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard for Fridley Auto Repair. Anyone wish to speak to this public hearing? Please come up to the microphone, give your name and address for the record, please.
Hello, my name is Rustam. I am from Edina, Minnesota, 7208 Trilling Lane, Edina, is the address. And yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, and I guess there is some of our fault to it, and if you guys do decide to revoke, that would be totally fair. I guess there was a disconnect from our understanding that, repairing cars or, We thought automotive work would kind of cover repairing cars or taking parts off cars, but I guess it doesn't cover that. And as soon as we learned that that was an issue, the tenant kind of ceased operation and they cleaned up the yard, and they're just storing a couple of their vehicles inside right now until the end of the month when they're gonna move out. And we have another tenant who does more of an outer repair business that is thinking about going in there, and if you guys revoke it, we'll try to reapply for a new conditional use permit. Yeah, and as far as the items in the outer, like the building code and permit, we kind of put the responsibility of doing that on the tenant, which was Fridley Automotive. Unfortunately, we had a really bad experience with them because they didn't pay for like 6 months, and they were blaming a bunch of different stuff, and we had to evict them, and even after eviction, it was like a little bit tough to get rid of them. But we ended up doing it, and now we have more of a better established, kind of a good guy tenant who wants to go in there. He currently has a mechanic shop in Minneapolis in one of our buildings, and he's a pretty good operator. So we are thinking on putting that guy in the building. And as far as illicit discharge, yeah, it's very unfortunate. And as soon as we learned that, we kind of removed all the bad cars, cleaned up the parking lot, and we really took immediate actions to prevent that from happening more. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just so the record's clear, he's a representative of the property owner.
I was just gonna ask that. First off, could you please spell your last name for the secretary, please?
Sure. It's M as in Mary, U as in umbrella, H as in Henry, A as in apple, R as in Robert, A as in apple, M as in Mary, O as in Oprah, V as in Victor. I struggle with this sometimes. It's like a tough one.
So, again, according to Mr. Bucciccone, you are a representative of the property owner and no connection with Fridley Auto.
No connection with
Yeah.
both tenants, yeah.
All right.
And one more thing I would like to add is that if you guys give us like forgiveness and we keep the CUP, then we could take the building code stuff in our own kind of responsibility, and the space will need a HVAC update and a flammable waste trap, and we're willing to get that done within 30 to 60 days before the next tenant, auto mechanic tenant moves in, and we can maybe submit all the necessary information to kind of update city's records on, business hours, business name, and all that stuff, if there's a chance to do that. If not, we'll try to reapply or look for other tenants.
Just for your understanding, a conditional use permit is issued to an individual or a business to run their business. So it cannot be transferred from one person to another person.
Oh, I see.
So if this other business wished to attempt to work out of that location, they would have to apply for their own permit.
I see. So
So it's totally irrelevant to this
Oh, I see.
permit tonight altogether.
Makes sense. Yeah, we had some experience working with like Invergrove Heights kind of CUP, and there they said it stays with the property, and basically as long as the use has not been vacated for a year, and it's a similar use, you can continue. But I guess in the city of Coon Rapids, maybe it's a little bit different, so that each individual tenant might have to get their own, but maybe not.
Mr. Fernelius.
Yeah, perhaps I can clarify that. The same legal principle applies here in Coon Rapids as well. So the conditional use permit does theoretically and legally run with the land. So the action tonight would actually be to revoke it. And then any subsequent tenant for this space would have to apply for a conditional use permit. Part of the reason why, well, there's probably several things going on here. One, there's an unusual mix of tenants in the building. I think part of that is just a function of the building itself and the age and it's the way that it's laid out. But it's also in our overlay district. So a number of these uses that several blocks away along Coon Rapids Boulevard might be a permitted use, for example, auto-oriented use, because this is in the overlay. And also, I believe in our Port Campus Square, that's what triggers a conditional use permit. So the action for the commission is to consider the revocation of it, which basically means that any, subsequent tenant for this space or really any other space in the building would have to apply for it. I would make one comment, and of course, I don't want to try and prejudice your decision, but, one of the things that's difficult for us as staff with regard to, let's say, just preserving the existing conditional use permit is that we have a number of conditions that were put in place in January of 2021 that have not been complied with. So I think part of our recommendation in starting over is we're going to ask for more information. I think we're probably going to have a much tighter timeline in terms of compliance. And I think that frankly does provide some leverage to try and ensure that those things happen the next time around.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, I can sit down.
Yep. Anyone else wish to speak at the public hearing? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Commission.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Geisler.
I think staff is right to consider revocation here solely for the fact that given that things weren't addressed, given that we did have a discussion about environmental impacts when we initially issued the CUP in the first place, I do think that if a new auto repair establishment or similar business were to enter in there, we would want to see a fresh CUP. We would want to be able to establish new, potentially more proper conditions on that CUP if it were to come forward to address an auto repair establishment in this location if one were to come forward. So I think revocation is appropriate, namely because it is no longer reasonable for this to stay there based on what staff is saying at this moment.
Chair Schwartz.
Commissioner Knobloch.
I just want to concur, I love that word, concur or agree with Commissioner Geisler in everything that he said. And I also just want to say thank you to the Planning Commission and Mr. Fresnelius and for the applicant, the representative from the property owner. Thank you very much for giving the information and your input to it. It's very helpful. So, but I agree that this conditional use permit needs to be revoked tonight. So that's it.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Casey.
I will make a motion in planning case 21-2. I move that the Planning Commission revoke the conditional use permit for an auto repair establishment.
I'll second it.
Motion by Casey, second by Knobloch. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. This is the decision by the Planning Commission and can be appealed to the City Council within 10 business days if someone so chooses. All right, our next case is Planning Case 21-51, second conditional use permit revocation at 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard. 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard LLC. Mr. Fernelius.
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz and Commissioners. So, as you mentioned, this is the second conditional use permit related to 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard. This is for tenant space 119. As you recall, back in November of last year, 2021, Commission approved a conditional use permit for a service business with office warehouse. The tenant was Coon Rapids Boulevard LLC to operate in Suite 119. There were two conditions of approval. One is that the landscaping be brought into compliance by May 31st of 2022, which did not happen. And then compliance with Title 11, the city code, which they're also not in compliance with. The space was never occupied by that tenant, consistent with the original CUP. They also never applied for any building permits for an auto repair use or applied for a conditional use permit for that matter, so we don't have a certificate of occupancy. There is a new tenant that did move in, Carson Undercoating, which moved into that space in March of this year. If they want to remain in that space, they also would need to apply for a conditional use permit. We did make a site visit, same site visit for the other tenant space a couple weeks ago. One of our inspectors was a part of that and made a couple of recommendations to the tenant, at least as it related to the building code. I think there are some fairly significant things that would have to be done to that space, but the tenant and the property owner will have to discuss whether it is economically feasible to do that, but they will need to apply for a conditional use permit for the tenant to remain in that space. This is a photograph that we took when we were out at our site visit of the activity that is going on in that particular location. So the space is not compliant with our city zoning code, the building code, or the original conditions of approval. As I cited in my last presentation, there are 3 different potential triggers, if you will, for revoking a conditional use permit, and we believe those have been met in this particular situation, and our recommendation is to revoke the conditional use permit for planning case 21-51, a service business with office warehouse, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fernelius. Any questions for Mr. Fernelius at this time, or in this case? Commissioner Geisler.
Mr. Fernelius, do we have the ability to limit the CUP to a suite number as well on a property, or is it just on the parcel itself?
Chair, okay, Mr. Bucconi has raised his hand.
So if a specific use is tied to a specific part of a property and it's a multi-tenant space like this is purporting to be, you can tie a conditional use to that tenant space. It's, as we've learned through this process, the certificate of occupancy is sort of how you should look at this. Like if, for instance, they wanted to move a wall within a building, that then triggers a new certificate of occupancy, and it could be seen as an expansion of a conditional use. So if there's one space of the building that's one conditional use and another space of the building that's another conditional use, if anything changes within those, technically it might be changing that conditional use and should be considered. The tenant or the property owner should consider to come back before this body. But a property can have more than one conditional use permit.
But it could be subdivided individually
Yes.
if we chose to, or it can be attached to the entire property as it stands, multi-tenant or single.
Yes, think of, for lack of a better example, think of a shopping mall. And one store in that thing is a conditional use permit, but the next space next door could be a permitted use. Well, this is the similar idea here.
Chair Schwartz, if I can just offer maybe an observation. I mean, I think that's been one of the challenges with this property, with as many conditional use permits as the city has considered, approved, revoked, is that, you know, we do have to look at these individually, but I think as part of that analysis, we also need to look at the existing conditional uses that are there, because among the things that we evaluate that are very relevant is parking. Depending upon what type of conditional use it is, for example, there have been people that looked at the larger space for a event center. That could consume all of the parking on the property. And so if we, as we consider a use like that, that may exclude other use of the building. So this is the balancing act that I think the property owner and tenants, as well as the city, are really trying to figure out. We have, explained this on numerous occasions in a cautionary way that, you need to pay attention to how many of these conditional use applications you're making, because we can consider the totality of it all. It's not as if there's an infinite amount of space, and we're not necessarily obligated to approve every conditional use permit that comes before you. While we have to look at them, I think we can consider the cumulative effect that those have, so that we're not running into a situation where we have parking issues or other kinds of things. So I just wanted to offer that as, additional information to consider.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Schmolke?
So what I do recall last year when we were reviewing these, I think one of the things that we struggled with is that these CUPs were coming to us one at a time, right? And I remember asking, is there any sort of way we could get a holistic plan? What is the vision, et cetera, of the different uses, et cetera, so we could make better decisions, right? I guess one of the benefits of revoking this is I feel like it's a little bit of a do-over, right? Kind of being able to learn from, what has happened over the last year. So I'm in support of revoking it. But I think still, any plans going forward, it would be extremely helpful if we had something from the property owner that gave us more information in the direction they're looking to go with this property. That will help, just as you said, it's like, what if, the request was to bring in an event center? It is not set up for that, right? So that would be my ask, is that as, if we do revoke this, that anything moving forward, that while each CUP can still come forward, it would be very beneficial to have a long-term plan or vision.
And Mr. Fernelius, along those same lines, over and above the revocation on this particular case tonight, into the future, since a lot of these conditions, things such as landscaping, for example, pertains to the overall property, could we make those types of things conditions to the property owner prior to any further conditional use permit being brought forward?
Mr. Chair. We actually had a conversation about this exact thing today. We're trying to confine this specific agenda item to this specific agenda item. As you know, and we've talked about, there are some outstanding CUP things, and we've talked about enforcement actions among staff for those open CUPs that we can take. Just know that we're working on it, and if there is future applications, staff will work with the applicant in that situation, for sure. We want them to be in compliance just as much as you do.
Thank you.
Chair Schwartz?
Commissioner Knobloch.
To piggyback off Commissioner Schmolke and Chair Schwartz, your own comments, excellent. The question I have for Mr. Fernelius, and I think I just got it right for the first time in like 2 years.
Nice job.
Yes. The question I have is there a capacity in your analysis for the city? Is there a sweet spot? Is there a ideal maximum, for a lack of a better way of saying, is there a maximum cap through your analysis and experience, that conditional use CUPs work or don't work in the city of Coon Rapids? Is that something that the city or planning commission have looked into or reviewed?
Commissioner Knobloch, no. I mean, so each conditional use application is evaluated based on what's in that application, the site plan, the facts, the use. Depending upon what the use is, the parking demands are going to be different. Some of our standards or requirements are going to vary. So, there are, depending upon what the use is, so in any particular location, the size of the parcel is going to limit how much lot coverage you can have, and how much of that you can use for parking, and how much you can use for building. This is complicated because we have a multi-tenant building with multiple uses. And so it makes it challenging to kind of predict into the future. But again, I think as Commissioner Schmolke has made comments on, I mean, we've expressed those same things to the property owner in the past, that it would be great to have some kind of a plan, some kind of a strategy to understand how are you marketing the building, because obviously you want to make sure that it's compatible, that you're not moving tenants in that don't want another use next door and they're going to move right out. I mean, you have to, I think, pay attention to that as well. So I think we appreciate and recognize the challenges that the property owner has, but that's also their business too. And they're the experts at it. We aren't. So I guess that would be my response to your question.
Thank you for a very good explanation, Mr. Fernelius.
Any other comments from the commission? Anyone ready for a motion?
Public comment, Mr.
Yeah, we
Chair.
didn't do public, actually.
Oh, that's right. Open a public hearing in planning case 21-51, conditional use permit revocation at 3050 Coon Rapids Boulevard. Anyone wish to speak at this public hearing? Again, come to the microphone. Spell your last name again for the secretary.
So my name is Rustam Mukharamov, and last name is M as in Mary, U as in umbrella, H as in Henry, A as in apple, R as in Robert, A as in apple, M as in Mary, O as in Opera, V as in Victor. And I live at 7208 Trillium Lane in Edina, Minnesota. 55435 is the zip code.
Thank you.
To kind of start this conversation, we kind of learned that this is a more challenging kind of a property or a piece of property because it was a boat dealership and it's located in more of like a retail corridor of Coon Rapids, and it has some conditional use allowance for some like light industrial uses, which would be, I think, like automotive and contractors. Because of the exterior kind of an appeal and what the building looks like, it's kind of more difficult to bring in retail businesses in there. And also, I think there's a lot of vacancy in city of Coon Rapids for retail, and overall retail kind of a class from a real estate agent perspective has been hit with Amazon and with COVID, and there's vacancy galore all around, and it's harder to bring those tenants in unless you're like in prime or urban core. And I think that's going to slowly change. If we had a crystal ball, we would probably not buy this property because it's almost like a problem child for us, just like it might be a problem child for you. And we are just taking up this challenge of vacancy at this property and trying to figure out the best way to, we're trying to learn and figure out the best way to fix the vacancy challenge in line with what the city is, working with us. And I really appreciate everybody in the city. Overall, they've been very accommodating and great to work with. As far as the vision for this property, we have a couple mentors that established business centers out of kind of old factories or old kind of abandoned buildings, and they had very good success with them. And we were trying to do something like that here as well, to kind of have like a business center or commerce center, and do it as much as, as long as the city kind of code and zoning code and everything allows. And we try to use our best judgment to kind of pick the tenants that fit well and play well together. Putting, for example, like a daycare next to like a mechanic or whatever would not be like a good fit. So we're trying to kind of buffer those things. And for the most part, that's kind of my comments. As far as the future, we kind of bled out a little bit on, in the finance dimension with the carrying cost of an empty building for a longer time. And there was a lot of challenges with construction and whatever. So, but we're still kind of trying to come ahead and kind of deal with it little by little. If we had a crystal ball and we bought the building, good idea would be to tear it down and build something new. But I think economics of that kind of didn't make sense at that moment. And the economic forecast for the economy with COVID happening and a lot of things moving, it was too risky. So we were thinking kind of do some improvements to it, make it a little bit better, kind of drive it for another 5 years or so, or 10 years, and then tear it down. but because of all the dilapidated and deferred maintenance on the property, that we actually spent about, I think, $500,000 or $600,000 on it to kind of bring it from what it was to where it is, and we tried to improve it. And initially, when we got this project, like a lot of people from the community kind of told me, "Oh, that building is where businesses go to die." And like it's like a terrible place to be, and it was kind of, the building overall was falling apart, and it was pretty bad. So we tried our best to improve it, and if we had more room in our budget, we would definitely improve the siding, paint the roof, make it more nice, because there's a lot of these metal buildings on Coon Rapids Boulevard. When they're kept up well, they look okay and they look good. It's not like a brand new brick and mortar kind of a fancy CVS kind of building, but it still has some life in it. And when we were going into it, we were like, well, it has some industrial uses, light industrial uses, it has some retail uses, and we thought it's best of both worlds, but at the end we learned that it's actually worst of both worlds, because it's like a kind of a mismatch. So now here we are, and we're trying to, overcome this challenge of vacancy and fill it up and put businesses that will serve the community and, create jobs and, create equity. But that's kind of a vision, and we are open to any kind of ideas from the city or from you guys to help us, pick a better path for this property. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you.
Yep. Should I ask that? Questions?
Anyone else wish to speak at the public hearing? Seeing none, close the public hearing. All right, Commission.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Schmolke.
I will make a motion in planning case 21-51 that the Planning Commission revoke the conditional use permit for a service business with office warehouse.
Second.
Motion by Schmolke, second by Geisler. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. This is a decision by the Planning Commission and can be appealed to the City Council within 10 business days if someone so chooses. Thank you. All right, moving on to other business. Mr. Kroll, anything you have for us in anticipation of what we might be looking at next month?
Sure. So we have a potential proposal for some townhomes, part of Mary T, another development about I think it's a 30 townhome developments and then one single unit development. And then we have a industrial building in the Evergreen Industrial Park, kind of a last site. It's an existing parking lot kind of by Green Bay Packaging, and I think Alina Health is in part of that building. A potential industrial warehouse building are the two coming for next July. And then we have a potential home occupation permit actually that has come through that will be on the agenda.
All right,
So, yeah.
thank you. And Commission, anyone have anything under other business?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Geisler.
Mr. Kroll, has there been a building permit pulled for the, what would it be, the Dollar General site on the corner of Hanson there? Notice the site's been cleared.
Yeah, that is a good question. I am unaware if they've pulled that through. I know I've been working with them on their signage and some sign permits, but a building permit, I don't know if Grant, if you had additional information.
That's a good question. I don't know the status of it. If the site's been cleared, I assume some kind of, grading permit has been obtained, but I don't know where we're at on plan review. Have you seen any building or site plans from the applicant?
I haven't. Matt might have had seen it before he had gone through there and was taking a look at that since he was here for the site plan review for that. So I haven't seen anything. I know I've just been working with one of the contractors on their signage and the sign permit coming through. So.
Question on that same property is, now that it's been cleared, is the church sign that's on that property, is that gonna have to be moved? Is the church allowed to have an off-site sign on someone else's property?
They would not, so that will have to be addressed. If it in fact is on the property that they sold, yeah, then that would have to be moved.
Because they do have a sign right up by the corner.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
All right. Anyone else with anything for other business?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Geisler?
I think maybe it'd just be a good capstone to say that in the event that when we have CUPs coming forward, I think we as a commission would love to see that for the adjacent use analysis that we're getting a CUP analysis if there's other CUPs in an adjacent property or on the same property, which would be directly adjacent. I think that would be something that we're seeking pretty hard case. We've got some examples around, but even for anything out there, the conditional use process is very good and very flexible, but we want to be careful about what's going on around and what's adjacent to those CUPs. And I think focusing on that and making sure we really understand what's around a conditional use request would be very helpful for us as a commission.
I think it's entirely relevant if it's on the same property, right? I think that's obviously, this is a situation where that's good information, and I think that's something we can discuss in terms of how we would implement that or how we would approach that. But well, we can take that under advisement.
Is it possible to have a workshop to cover any future development of conditional use permits at that location?
That's something that we could discuss. I guess we would maybe want to get some clarity in terms of topics, and what exactly you would like to discuss about it, so that we could, I guess, be prepared and focus the discussion. I think part of Mr. Buccioni's comments earlier is we have to be a little bit careful about, prejudicing decisions and doing things that might unfairly impact an application that we get. So we'd have to be, I think, mindful and aware of how far we can go with that. But I think if we wanted to have maybe a general discussion about the types of concerns we have with the property, the particular issues that we have with conditional use permits, that might be helpful information for us to know, for us to advise the property owner as they're preparing those applications. And Blair, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add.
I think workshops are always good. I think they work well, much better in the council setting because their timeline can be different than our timeline. With the 60-day rule, in and of itself, we could get an application and not have time to schedule a workshop. So in situations where you feel like you need more time or the discussion is somewhat workshop-like, then we can always extend that 60-day rule and treat, you don't want to say treat this meeting like a workshop because it's certainly not, but that's one mechanism we have available. And if we think it would benefit a workshop, we would not hesitate to ask you folks to do that for sure. I know Mr. Fernelius and I have talked plenty about how any future applications for conditional use permits might be affected by our past experiences.
Well, that's kind of where I was going, was that it would allow everybody to get on the same page as far as what our anticipated outlook would be for any future CUPs, or what conditions we could impose along those lines prior to them coming forward.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, really quick, I agree with all of that. I think one of the things that's interesting about this particular situation is it's one of the few where we've had multiple CUPs at a single location. And that idea, again, of not really understanding what was the vision. Personally, sometimes I don't feel like I'm prepared to ask necessarily all the questions that maybe should be asked, so that we can help to make the right decision with staff on whether or not the CUP is good for that particular case. Taking each CUP on its own, independence, but then understanding though too, what can that site sustain? What can it actually support? So I think from my education purposes, and I think from what I'm hearing from the rest of the staff, is just education, just to help us so that we can think through these better. It was a unique circumstance, and we all raised concerns about this particular property and how the CUPs were coming forth. Again, I look at it as positive because we have learnings and can proceed forward, but I think education is always helpful.
Chair Schwartz?
Commissioner Knobloch.
I think Commissioner Geisler was, with his point, was right on track, but if we could have a vicinity of like-minded or similar conditional use permits, say within a mile, or not even a mile, say 500 yards of that applicant, that would be relevant without being prejudicial, or if it's relevant. And that would have to be in the planning department's purview in the city of what information that would be provided that they feel is relative. Say if you had a neighborhood and within 100 yards there were 10 homes with conditional use permits for hairdressers or something, that would be notable.
I got this. Mr. Chair, so one of the considerations in almost all conditional use permits you'll see is the fit. That's why we're talking about conditional use permits. And so to try and confine it to a half mile or 1 mile or 2 miles, if you'll remember, Commissioner Knobloch, there was a daycare where we had a citizen complaint basically about how their neighborhood is turning into a conditional use permit island, more or less. And they raised, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. And that when there is a concentration of CUPs that will affect our recommendation to you, either positively or negatively, you can trust we'll bring it to your attention. Certainly when there's a focus of CUPs in one spot, that's part of our consideration as well. It's the fit piece of it. And we'll bring forward all relevant information we're aware of. This is where I ask you to trust. I've worked with you for nearly 5 years. Mr. Fernelius has been here even longer. And Mr. Kroll is on his way to being exceptional, by the way. And he's with Mr. Brown. So we'll make sure you have all the relevant information we have. We hear you, and we will make sure we come prepared to address other conditional uses that may affect any specific applicant in the future and their fit in that overlay or whatever.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Geisler.
if I may, to Mr. Fernelius's point about topics to be educated on, I would love to understand how CUPs and relative to conditions for the tenant, for the property owner, and how those are separate and how those work together. That creates some special cases. In many cases, it's one and the same, and it doesn't matter. When they're separate, many of the things we're talking about is modifying the outlying property, not the specific use inside of a building or what's going on. So I think if you can provide education for us on how to better to work with, understand what those tools are for us, and how you can present those pieces to us, or if there's, if we can help you craft your recommendations a little cleaner for us so we can understand them better. I think that would be rife for a workshop learning moment for us that also hopefully wouldn't take too long, that we could just tack it on at the front or back of a session.
We can certainly do that.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Casey.
I would move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion by Casey, second by Schmolke. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.